Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm Don Grodoff. Along with my wife Gina, we have a practice called Focused Healthy Family, helping families get past the behavior and anxiety issues naturally. We also produce the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, where we are advocates for our own family and others dealing with OCD and anxiety. In the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, we do interviews, provide resources, and information for treatment and support of OCD recovery. We also want to hear from you, your comments, and if you want to tell your story, we want to put it up on the podcast, on our Stories from the OCD side. Our goal in these podcasts is to raise awareness of and advocate for the recovery from obsessive-compulsive disorder, better known as OCD. Sponsoring our podcast is Quintessential Biosciences, better known as Q Sciences. Gina and I learned the hard way when we realized our daughter's supplements weren't being absorbed properly, and she really wasn't getting the nutrients that she needed. We knew the power of quality supplements in our health of our family, so it was time to find a better product. That is when we were introduced to Q Sciences. Q Sciences products provide the highest quality, maximum absorption possible, and improved health for the body and mind. Products like hemp oil, sleep spray, and Kids Focus convinced us that they really make a difference in our family's health. You too can have a healthy family, so stop wasting your money on supplements that don't work. Check out Q Science products today at qscience.focusedhealthyfamily.com. That's the letter Q, sciences.focusedhealthyfamily.com. You can also find the link on the invisiblewheelchair.com front page. Now, let's get to that podcast. Today is another interview podcast here on the Invisible Wheelchair. Another professional talking about OCD or an anxiety issue. Let's join that interview now. I'm excited today that I've got Annette Hines on the podcast. Annette Hines is the founding partner of Special Needs Law Group of Massachusetts, PC, and has been practicing in the areas of special needs, elder law, and estate planning for over 20 years. Her clients include individuals and families of children with special needs, the elderly, and others in the community. She received her BA from the University of Vermont, her MBA from the Suffolk University, and her GD from the Howard University School of Law. Ms. Hines brings personal experience with special needs to her practice as the mother of two daughters, one of whom passed away from mitochondrial disease in November of 2013. This deep personal understanding of special needs fuels her passion for quality special needs planning and drives her dedication to the practice. In April of 2019, she published Butterflies and Second Chances, a beautiful memoir about her life raising her disabled daughter, which was an Amazon bestseller. Ms. Hines is a recipient of the 2021 National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys Teresa Award by the Teresa Foundation in recognition of her outstanding efforts in advocacy for individuals with special needs. She has been recognized as a distinguished citizen by ARC Massachusetts and cited for public service by both the Massachusetts State Senate and House of Representatives for her work on behalf of people with disabilities. She was designated a 2016 Top Women of Law for Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly and has been designated a Massachusetts Super Lawyer every year since 2014. So I'm really excited. Let's get to that interview now. So Annette, thank you so much for being part of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I welcome you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
What I always like to do with the people that I interview is ask them if they could just tell maybe a little personal story or a story about themselves. Gives my audience a kind of a personal view of you and what you're like and all. So if you could do that, I'd really appreciate it.
Being a lawyer, I really love to talk about myself. So
Okay.
I'm just going to start right off by saying that.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, then tell away. Do I have to find a stopping point or do I have to cut you off? It's
Because I could talk for days. No, I'm really, the best thing I ever did was become a mom of two awesome girls, Elizabeth and Caroline. Both my girls had some challenges. My Elizabeth, unfortunately, passed away at age 17 of mitochondrial disease, and she was very profoundly disabled. Because of her challenges, I started on a journey of being, an advocate and a special needs attorney, a disability attorney. And she was such a blessing to me in so many ways. My younger daughter, Caroline, who was born 4 years later, had a lot of issues related to being a sibling of a profoundly impacted child. And she had a lot of invisible disabilities. And it's one of the reasons that I'm really excited to be here talking to you today, because she's 20 now, and she's largely moved on from a lot of things, but she was a highly anxious child. She dealt with a lot of OCD as well. And, just had a lot of executive function issues, and really was profoundly impacted by the chaos and the crisis that was in our house all the time, that came from never knowing when we were going to have a medical crisis and when there was going to be a death in our family. As you can imagine, there was just so much of that. And one of the stories that I like to tell that really hits home for so many parents is when my Elizabeth was about 8 years old and my Caroline was about 4 or 5. I was getting Elizabeth ready for her day. She was in a wheelchair and, didn't have use of her body at all. She was blind and didn't speak, and she needed full and total care. If that gives you a picture, G-tube and medications and just so much care. So on the weekends, we didn't have any help, and I had to do everything. And it took me 2 hours to get ready for the day with her. So there's my little Caroline sitting in the chair, waiting, playing with toys while I'm doing medications and dressing and bathing and G-tube feeds and trying to do everything, right? And I know all of you parents out there are picturing this. Even if you're not doing this yourself, you are living your own life of some form of this, and you get it. At one point, Caroline's looking up at me with these big eyes and says to me at 4 or 5 years old, "Mommy, when am I going to have to start changing Elizabeth's diaper?" And it hits me like a brick in the face. My kid is already worrying about this.
Oh, wow.
That's what it means to be a sibling of a special needs kid. And as the mom, who at that point was already divorced and single parenting. Now, not all of you are doing that, but I was. I had to think about how to protect her from all of this worry and care. And that was our life, right? So I lied through my teeth and said to her, "Caroline, honey, don't worry. Mommy's got a plan for all of this. And all you have to do is be Elizabeth's sister."
That's nice.
But I had no clue what I was doing, even though I was a lawyer and an advocate and really, thought I had a leg up on all of this. It was a brick in the face. That just goes to show you that, there's a lot more going on there, with the hidden challenges that a lot of our kids are facing. So that's the story I like to tell when people ask me about my family.
Well, and that's a wonderful story because it does relate. Even if you don't have a child that is in a wheelchair, one of the things we found is that it affects the whole family, so it's not, they suffer and they suffer the most, but everyone else has their own things that they suffer through. So yeah, no, I can relate to that. Our other kids that weren't necessarily the kids with the special needs were suffering because they lacked attention, they lacked, uh, just the support and all that we, because your attention is so 100% of your attention has to almost be on the person that has the needs.
Of
So
course.
I understand that. Well, being the lawyer that you are, I wanted to make sure that we talk about the things that people should be thinking about legally, because I haven't I didn't when we first made contact, it was, I hadn't really put that in my mind. I hadn't put it on the podcast of what kind of legal things do I have to think about when I have a child that, or a person that is dealing with this kind of need. So maybe you could kind of talk about some of the legal issues that we should be thinking about with this.
Well, we kind of think about it in phases. So when you have a really young child, you're in diagnosis mode and you're dealing with early intervention. Mostly you're dealing maybe with insurance and medical issues potentially, or, access to community supports and services. And that's where a lot of your legal or advocacy is focused. Then when your child's in school age issues, a lot of your energy and sort of legal stuff is focused there, and possibly still working in the health insurance, medical community as well. Although we've made a lot of strides legally across the country in getting things covered by insurance providers, for autism, for different kinds of medications, for different kinds of diagnoses. There's always more. There's always more that needs to be done. As your child starts to hit the teenage years and you're starting to think about that transition to adulthood, there's a lot more legal things that need to be considered. When you get to that transition planning realm, starting at age 16, 17, up through those middle 20s of the adult years, it's kind of a three-legged stool of legal transition planning. You're looking at public benefits, you're looking at legal authority, so guardianship or no guardianship. Who will be making decisions for my child? Will that be the child? Will it be me or somebody like me, or some combination? How's that going to work? How's that going to happen? And we need to think about that. And then that third leg of the stool is going to be future planning. That's usually around the estate planning of the family member, the parent, that has to do with special needs trusts and, how are we going to plan for when we're not here anymore? That's financial, that's with trust, that's, who's going to take over for us when we're not here anymore. And that tends to be something that people start thinking about when their kids are, heading off into that adult world. So the public benefits piece really gets addressed because when your child becomes an adult at age 18, they are eligible for things like Social Security payments, which they were not necessarily eligible for as a child. They become eligible for housing benefits. At some point, they become eligible for other supports in the community, and things change for them. Even with school, things change for them. They're aging out of school and they need to maybe, start thinking about work and other kinds of vocational supports, etc. And this is when you may be doing battle in a way that you never did with your school district, because all of those public benefits, or many of them, not all of them, but many of them, are not entitlements. They are only there if there is money to fund them. Educational supports are entitlements, meaning that your school district, and this is all across the country because this is a federal entitlement program, if your child requires a certain educational program to meet their IEP or to meet progress, then your school district must pay for it. That's an entitlement. But adult services are not entitlements, with the exception of Social Security payments and Medicaid, which is health insurance. Everything else, housing is not an entitlement. Everything else, not an entitlement. You have to understand that you're in a different world now. Employment, not an entitlement. If those funds are not in your state and local budget, your child, your adult child, may now not be supported. So your advocacy takes on a much different tone. It's just another world. So that's why the transition years become important, and you are facing a different path with your advocacy and your skills.
Well, and that leads us right into perfect segue. You're very good at this segue into talking about, yeah, because you, I believe, have some tips that you like to talk about advocacy, and I really understand advocacy. Like I said, when we got into the worst of it, trying to figure out where to go, what to do, how to do it, all of that, we had to research it. We had to, and then be an advocate to get the right stuff for our child. So talk a little bit about like I say, the advocacy that I know you do a lot of it, and that the tips that you would recommend to someone about that.
So we have 5 advocacy tips that we really like people to sharpen in order to be an effective advocate. I know this is not easy stuff because you are really talking about deeply personal and deeply emotional things here, and it can be very hard. And I don't advocate for my own children. I have somebody else do it because I know that I cannot effectively advocate without getting upset, crying, yelling, screaming, etc. It's just really difficult. In the last year of my daughter Elizabeth's life, I was fighting for nursing hours for her at home. I had our state Medicaid agency telling me that my daughter was improving when she was actually dying. I mean, they actually cut her nursing hours months before she passed away. She was actually dying in front of me, and they were telling me that she was improving. Very frustrating.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I like to suggest is that if you can get to know your opponent or know the person that you are advocating against or with, having a communication with. So whether that's the person in your school district, or whether that's the insurance person, or whoever you're talking to, if you know a little something about them, or you can get to know something about them, that's really helpful. There's this great episode of a show out there where this woman who's trying to get to know her insurance claims agent, and she goes out and does horseback riding to try to get on her good side so she can get a new wheelchair for her son.
Is that Speechless? Is that what
yeah, Speechless.
Yeah.
And I thought that's a perfect example of what I talk about with know your opponent. It's going a little far, but
she does do that.
if you get to, if you know that somebody's interested in baseball, I mean, it's a little bit chit-chatty, but it can be really nice to just have some common ground with people. Maybe just ask them their advice, or, ask them a little bit about what the rules are, and kick into a conversation a little bit. The next thing is you need to be an expert in whatever it is that you're asking about. So do your homework and make sure that before you come to the table that you've really crossed your T's and dotted your I's. So if you're asking for example, a reading program to be covered by your school district, please make sure that you really understand a lot about that reading program so that when they have questions for you about it, you can answer them politely, provide the information that they may be looking for. You can save them some time by providing that information. The third thing is be creative, because you really do have all the answers and they don't have time to be creative for thousands of students or thousands of claimants or whatever the case may be. And if you can come to them with a simple solution that costs less money, they're going to jump on it. So if you have that ability to come up with a creative answer for them, it's really going to be much simpler than just coming to them with a problem and saying, you solve this for me because that's your job. And the simpler you can keep it, the better. The fourth thing is, and this is really the most important thing, it's your communication. Honestly, this is going to win it every time. And most people lose on poor communication. And this is where I was saying about the crying and the screaming. I have to tell you that I have really done such a bad job.
Okay.
I really have. Everybody does, it happens. You have to take the emotion out of it unless you're sure that that's going to work for you with the person that you're talking to. But most of the time it doesn't. And I don't mean to be dispassionate. I don't mean to be cold, but again, usually the crying doesn't work and the screaming doesn't work. But you need to be very clear, very concise, just get right to the point. And if you need to, practice on a friend, practice in the mirror, especially if you're a person who is very nervous talking to other people. Use written tools. So write it up ahead of time and hand it out to somebody, and then just hit the highlights. And that will keep it short as well. And then lastly, this is a tip, but not a tip, but I just want you to be prepared for potential outcomes. Be prepared to lose some of the time and be prepared to compromise, because you're not always going to win everything and you can't. Be prepared to be upset about things, but behind the scenes. And be patient, because your timeline is not their timeline. And you have to roll with it, especially during COVID. This has been the worst year for trying to get things done. It took you a long time to learn about your kid. It's going to take other people a long time to learn about them too. So those are my tips. What do you think?
No, those are great. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, yeah, we have a few of those things we need to work on ourselves. But we teach parent communications, and I understand that, because communication, in our view, can raise anxiety or lower anxiety depending on how you are able to respond and talk to somebody. So I understand that real well. I wanted to ask you about how having a daughter that was disabled and had the special needs, how did that change you or affect you as a lawyer? Did it do something? Did you lawyer differently after the fact, or as you got into more with your daughter?
Well, that's a great story. Thanks for asking. As I told you before we hit the record button, the ink was not even dry on my diploma when my daughter Elizabeth was born, and I hadn't even taken the bar yet. I always knew that I wanted to be a civil rights attorney. I am, so I went in a little bit of a different direction. I thought I was going to do some form of criminal law, civil rights, but I ended up doing disability law. So definitely Elizabeth being born took me in that direction. She has introduced me to some of the most amazing people in my life. She has absolutely made me an amazing advocate for people with disabilities. It has been a tremendous 25-year journey for sure. I am sure that I would not be doing this if it wasn't for her. It has been incredible. I would be doing some sort of advocacy work because I was already on that path. I went to Howard University Law School, which is a historically Black college in Washington, D.C. So I was already on my path to doing something civil rights oriented, but this definitely was a little bit of a right turn for sure.
Well, you've also written a book that I know called Butterflies and Second Chances. Can you tell us again? I can imagine what inspired you on that one, but tell us a little bit about why you decided to write a book and what it's done for you.
Well, after Elizabeth died, I was incredibly angry, and I really wasn't sure what my life was going to look like. I wasn't even sure I wanted to keep doing this work. The whole year after she died, I was numb, and I kind of was going through the motions and really wasn't showing up much. I mean, I was there in my life, but I wasn't there. And I ended up doing a grief group with other families who had lost their child to illness, which was very important for me. I needed to do something that was that specific. And I started journaling. The journal was pretty raw.
Okay.
And before I knew it, it was turning into something. And then when I looked at it, I was like, this could really be something. And then I thought this could really help somebody else. Because when I started trying to read things to help me, they were all too nice. They weren't getting to the point, and I needed something else that was going to tell me that I was going to be okay and that it was okay to be this mad and to feel all the things that I was feeling. So my book I'm really proud of it, and it is really honest, and it talks about my life with Elizabeth and Caroline. About a third of the book talks about what happens when Elizabeth dies and then after. I am starting to work on another book that talks about now and how her life has given so much meaning. Her life and her death has given so much meaning to my business and to how a purpose-driven life can really do so much for the world. So I'm excited about that too.
Well, we'll look forward to the second one. I'm going to look at getting that for myself because it sounds really fascinating. So we could probably talk on this all day, I would imagine, because there's each part of this could be stretched out into so much because there's a lot here, and I think we've covered some good basic stuff, and so I'm really appreciative of that. What I'd like to do now is just tell my audience what's the best way to find out more about you, about your book, whatever you want to give information to.
One thing that I'd love to share with the audience is that we have a lot of tools and free resources. Very much hopeful that people will join our online community, which is free. We do a circle of care and a Facebook Live event every Wednesday, Eastern Time at 6:00. So again, it's free to join, and that's at specialneedscompanies.com. So if you go there, you will find everything, access to our YouTube channel and our Facebook Live event and our Circle of Care group, all of the resources that we have, and our blog and the podcast, Parenting Impossible. There's so much there. I would just love to share all of those resources with the audience. That website is not very salesy. It's really just about all of us parents coming together to share all of our knowledge and wealth with each other.
Well, I will remind my audience that I will have that information up on the Invisible Wheelchair podcast under the interview resources, so they can find it there too. So, well, Annette, I really have enjoyed this conversation, and I think you've given some really good information, things for people to really think about, because A lot of people I know in working with autistic kids, I know the thoughts that parents have to go through in thinking about what's going to happen when I'm not there, and that's got to be brutal. I don't have that issue myself. My kids are able to manage what they're going through, but for those that can't, this information is vital. So thank you so much for sharing it with us today, and I really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed it. It's been great. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for letting me share all the things that I love to do.
This concludes this podcast. We hope you will subscribe if you haven't already. Remember, we would love your comments, or if you have a story to tell, we want to put it up on the podcast. Simply go to invisiblewheelchair.com to do that. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest, we love guests. So simply go to invisiblewheelchair.com and contact us from there. Gina and I are here to help you or your family get to a better place naturally. Simply visit focusedhealthyfamily.com for more information. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep tapping and focusing forward for a better way.